All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody to the webinar this afternoon. I'm very excited about the topic that we've got and the expertise that we have the expert that we have that's going to share her information with you. I'm Dave Carter, along with Chris Roper. We are the two regional directors for the Flower Hill Institute, which is coordinating the Meat and Poultry Technical Assistance Program. And we are very excited today to have Kelsey Hopkins, who is with us. She is not only with the Agricultural Marketing Service of USDA, she is completed and getting ready to defend her doctoral dissertation on halal marketing in the domestic marketplace. And we are so pleased that she's agreed to come on and present some of this information. So let me start off here without any further delay, and we'll get right into it. Um, so we're going to cover a number of things this afternoon. First of all, we will give you a brief overview. I call it a message from your sponsor. I just want to share a little bit of information on the Meat and Poultry Technical Assistance Program. But then Kelsey's going to take the reins and go through a number of topics on certification, marketing and domestic markets, regulatory considerations, consumer trends. We're going to hold off with question and answers until the end, but we will leave plenty of time to try and get to all of the questions that anyone might have. So first of all, let me just explain a little bit about the technical assistance commitment. When the Biden administration made a nearly $1 billion commitment to create a more resilient, diverse, and equitable meat and poultry processing system, Secretary Vilsack and the folks at USDA recognize that this has to be more than just grants going out, that the enterprises really need technical assistance to develop a successful business. And the charge that was given by USDA was to make sure that we really reach out to connect with underserved producers and communities. So, first of all, the network that was brought together is really robust. It includes the Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network out of Oregon State University, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the American Association of Meat Processors, which is the largest association representing the meat processing industry, but they represent the smaller processors. It includes the American Meat Science Association, the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, and Tuskegee University. And Flower Hill Institute, where Chris and I hang our hat, was brought on. We have a cooperative agreement to coordinate this network of folks that are providing the assistance. But in addition to these partners, these official partners, we're really pleased to have partnerships via MOUs with 18 different organizations, ranging from Latino Farmers and Ranchers, Farmers Veterans Coalition, Women in Ranching, and others. And the scope of work that we have is fourfold. First of all, we started in March of last year and has been a lot of focus on the federal funding technical assistance. That's because USDA has been offering so many grants. They put together the intermediary lending program and the like. And so we've been working to connect people with the technical assistance. But we're on board with this program through the end of 2026. And that's why we want to focus now that there are three other areas that we are putting a lot of emphasis on. That is providing technical assistance on meat and poultry processing, business development, and supply chain development. So everything from helping you to design your facility to putting together a marketing strategy and how to address the workforce or byproduct issues. We're tackling all of those issues. And this is important because smaller meat and poultry processing facilities do face a challenge. It's a extremely tough business. There's a paper that's been circulating for the last couple months by Dr. Sarah Lowe, when she talks about the survivability of smaller processors. And she talks about that diversification is a key element to surviving in the marketplace. And that's why we want to focus on the halal marketplace today. We have had a number of folks that have contacted us since we started last year that are engaged in developing halal processing and marketing enterprises. But the data that's available on the US marketplace is really scarce. I can tell you about the growth in halal in Dubai, but I can't tell you about the growth in Delaware or Detroit. And that's why we're really pleased to have um, Kelsey Hopkins with us today to talk about this. So, just to give you a little bit of background, she's an agricultural economist with the Packers and Stockyards Division of USDA. She's a doctoral candidate at Michigan State University, and her areas of specialty are food and agricultural economics, mixed methods, halal meat and poultry markets, and community engaged research and agribusiness. And as you can tell from the one in bold there, that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Kelsey, who will step in and take on the rest of this presentation.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Dave, and the Flower Hill folks for inviting me and setting up this event today. It's very exciting. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. And you know that, or you would know if you knew me personally, that if you get me started, I don't stop too quickly. So without further ado, I'm going to talk to begin with about an overview of the U.S. domestic halal meat and poultry market. I started studying this market about 3 years ago, and all of the information I'm going to present to you today comes from assistance that I have from the USDA, a predoctoral fellowship that I have from the National Institute of Food and Ag. So that's my little acknowledgement statement for the funding that they were able to give me during my doctoral program. I think it's important to understand the U.S. domestic halal meat and poultry market from the consumer side and the retailer side in terms of historical immigration and trends and how U.S. Muslims came to be here in the U.S. to kind of have an idea of who it is that you would be selling your products to and who to keep in mind when you're developing your business plan. So a brief history lesson here. In the 1600s and 1700s, the first Muslims came to the United States as African slaves and Spanish and Portuguese settlers. And the majority of these folks were found and settled in the southern United States. In the 1870s through roughly the 1920s, give or take a few years, we saw a wave of Syrian and Lebanese Muslims starting to come over and establish various communities in the Midwest. Big ones in particular would be in Iowa, the Cedar Rapids area. We have Detroit, Michigan, the Chicago, Milwaukee area as well in the Midwest. And then a little bit up further north, like in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis area. In the 30s and the 50s, we had, due to civil rights movements and a handful of other different things going on during that time, we had the African-American Muslims and the Great Migration, in which African-American Muslims that were in the southern part of the United States started to move northward into metro areas in the West, Midwest, and in the Northeast. So places like the New Jersey and New York City region, Detroit again Chicago, and other major metro areas. And then we saw in the 70s and 80s a wave of immigration coming from the Middle East and South Asian countries. Typically, these folks were highly skilled laborers, and so they were what we like to call those first generation type immigrants that settled and began raising families most recently in history here. And then 1980s through today, we've continued to have various waves of skilled labor immigration. And then also in the past 5, 10, 15 years, we've seen refugees. I'm currently living in the Chicago area. We have a lot of Afghani and Syrian refugees that have come into our space in the past handful of years. So what that means with all these different waves of immigration, especially picking up recently, over 75% of the American Muslim population are immigrants or children of immigrants. And the vast majority, or good number of them, are very highly educated. They're skilled laborers. They have income that they're able to spend on quality proteins, and they are looking for those. So another breakdown, about 30% of American Muslims have arrived in the U.S. since 2010. This includes folks who are citizens, naturalized citizens, or working towards that process, but also students and other people who may or may not stay in the United States long term. We have another almost 30%, 26%, that's arrived since between 2000 and 2009. And then other fairly large chunks in the 90s and the 80s. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about this market is that on average, Muslims are younger than non-Muslims in the US. So what does this matter? Why do we care about these trends in immigration and demographics for halal meat and poultry processing? Well, as you can see that the majority of these folks have been here and are probably, like I said, immigrants first, and maybe getting into the point of second or third generation children of immigrants, depending on the timeline. We know from studying other populations and from just general patterns of immigration that as folks become more integrated into new communities, they see income growth, which correlates with the ability to buy more expensive products like meat proteins. We can have a better idea of where geographically in the US we might want to have meat and poultry processors set up. So for instance, in the Midwest, it would be maybe in the Detroit, Michigan area, Chicago, Milwaukee, New York, New Jersey, or just the northeastern states in general are going to have those population hubs where you're going to see these folks more commonly. We know that more recent immigrants typically hold on more strongly to their religious beliefs. And since halal is a religious product, it's important to understand that and how quickly or how strongly they will adhere to that. And as we know with folks who are highly educated, they typically want a lot of information about what it is that they're buying. So transparency becomes very important to them. With that, we have a basic understanding of the demographics of our population. Now I want to talk about some regulatory considerations for operating in the halal market. And now I should say that going forward, when I say halal meat, I'm also including halal meat and poultry. It's just a little bit of a mouthful. In the United States, there are about 24 domestic certifications that you could see on a product for to say that it is halal. And when I say product, I mean meat or poultry. And if you look worldwide, so including things that could be imported, there's just over 200 certifications. If that sounds like a lot to you, it is, and you can imagine that consumers are perhaps a little bit overwhelmed. The ones in particular I'm focusing on today are going to be the domestic certifiers. So there's two major caps. We've got certifiers that are for profit. Examples would be ISWA, ISA, or Islamic Services of America, Halal Transactions of Omaha. Those are the ones that come to mind most readily, but there are others. And then nonprofit certifiers, HMS, Halal Monitoring Services, or HAFSA, Halal Food Standards Alliance of America. Again, there may be a handful of others. These are the ones that came to mind most readily for me. It probably won't surprise you given those 24 domestic certifications, but the US does not have a set halal standard. So unlike the USDA organic label, there is not one stamp you're going to see on a package, not one set of standards that a processor should be adhering to. What we have instead are consumer right to know labeling laws. And so basically what these mean is that if you are putting your stamp on a product that says this is halal or Zabiha halal or HMS certified halal, consumers would then be able or should then be able to understand what that label means and what particular standards are falling underneath it so that they can then hopefully have enough education on their behalf to pick their products. We also have different state by state animal welfare regulations like Prop 12, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, organic, and other regulations that could change how what things should be considered and paired with perhaps the halal standard. And then because this is a religious product, you could have custom or religious exemptions if you wanted to be a slaughterer. You may need to be a state inspected facility to sell your products in whichever market you're going for, and or you may want FSIS certification or regulation there. An important thing to note, which again you probably are already aware of, is that you must have the FSIS to sell over state lines. So part of my research for my dissertation focused on folks in the market and their preferences for a potential U.S. national halal certification if it were to become a reality. And it's something that's been a push in the market from both processors, retailers, and consumer groups. It's not just one or the other. So part of this project, I surveyed halal processors, halal retailers, and Muslim consumers, and found that in general, the overall market is in favor of a national standard. So they would like to see something that's a little bit more unified to make their shopping and or processing or selling practices a little easier to coordinate. In particular, we asked which characteristics of a hypothetical U.S. national certification would be most important. And then we also got some additional information from them about consumers' preferences, which I will present to you here as well. So halal processors, the majority in our sample were Zabiha, and some of them may even have been you on this call if you are interested and if you're already operating in this space a little bit. When asked to pick between three different characteristics of a certification, they were asked to pick the most important and the least important in groups of three, and they were asked this question a handful of different times with different things varying. So the most important thing to halal processors across the board when they were choosing between these different characteristics and what they'd like to see really thought out and well planned when a U.S. national halal certification were to be designed, is they cared most about halal standards. What's going to be required to be halal under this certification? Would we allow Zabiha or machine slaughter? And I'll get in more into what that is, what the differences are with that later. They also cared about who or what would be required to hold a certification. Would it be just the processor? Would it be a further processor? Retailers, individual products? And then they wanted to have some thought put into who is in charge of enforcement. If it should be enforced by, say, the USDA, a religious group, some combination, etc. Least important, processors didn't really care a whole lot about the cost of certification. They built that into their business plan and their pricing, most likely, and therefore the cost was not as worrisome to them as maybe some of these other things would be. And then they also were not as concerned about the inspection frequency or type. So if it was a random or a scheduled inspection and how maybe deep of a dive a inspector might make into records. They also were not super concerned about the benefits of certification. They knew that this particular area, whether it's a national halal standard or if they have their reputation, that could be very beneficial to them either way. Retailers very similarly cared a lot about which standards were going to be considered, who's required to hold certification again, who is in charge of enforcement. You'll see a lot of parallels here because you're both on the supply side. Retailers were not as concerned about the type of information available to their consumers on their side, or what's available to the consumer through the national certification, like a website or a board in which consumers could go and look for retailers in their area that were certified. They both cared and didn't care about who was in charge of enforcement overall. And again, they were not as concerned about the benefits of certification. Consumers, unsurprisingly, really cared about the standards, wanted to know who would be required to hold a certification, which would help them make their purchasing decisions, and who is in charge of enforcement. Many of these consumers in particular expressed that they trusted government enforcement more than they did third party, but that was not a uniform or unanimous preference. Consumers were not as concerned about the cost. They already pay higher prices for halal products. And if they really want Zabiha or machine slaughter, something that's certified, then they were willing to do that, to pay those higher prices. Again, who is in charge of enforcement was important and also not important depending on which consumer groups you were looking at. And they were not as concerned about the type of information available to them at the store level versus at the national, like a website or certifier's website level. Some follow-up questions. Muslim halal consumers, about 51% want Zabiha or hand slaughtered halal, 20% want machine. Many of them want Muslim slaughterers. A handful are okay with Jewish or Christian slaughterers. That's more of a religious difference on how strictly they want to adhere to what they interpret the Quran saying. And then about a third wanted an animal to face Mecca at the time of slaughter, wanted no stunning in the processing and slaughter method, and wanted non-GMO products, for instance. In terms of transparency, you can see from the percentages here that the majority of the consumers that responded to our survey, I should say there's about 500 of them, they wanted basically access to the information any information that they could. So they wanted the general public to be able to find information on the certification somewhere fairly simply. They wanted lists of certified processors and retailers to purchase from. They wanted the USDA or some other government organization to be enforcing the program, and wanted certifications and religious organizations involved in developing the program. So this is where things could go in the future, if the consumer groups, retailer groups, and processor groups that are currently advocating for a program like this are able to be successful. So I want to talk about general certification information next. First, we're going to focus on Zabiha or hand-slaughtered halal. This is what is considered the most authentic. If you adhere most strictly to what is written in the Quran, this is what the Muslim consumer is looking for. So typically these certifiers that will certify for hand-slaughtered halal are the nonprofit certifiers, HMS, HAFSA. A handful of others that are for-profit do claim to certify Zabiha, but the majority of them that I've seen in the market are these nonprofits. These requirements are the strictest, but they're going to result in high price premiums and a wider consumer market base, because if you're able to sell hand slaughtered and machine slaughter is seen as slightly less high standard, then you have both the hand slaughter market and the machine slaughter market that you could potentially appeal to. These certifications would require a Muslim slaughter person, so not a Jewish or a Christian individual. Individual spoken blessings for each and every animal slaughtered at the time of death. They would need to be slaughtered by hand with the appropriate size knife and sharp knife, and in a single cut to the throat, they would need to have 3 out of the 4 passages in the throat severed. So the major veins and arteries, the airway, but not the spinal cord, because they must die through exsanguination. Preferably from these certifiers, they want healthy and robust non-factory farm animals. Even better, is if you have organic or free range, sustainably ranged, insert additional quality indicator here for those animals, mainly because the customers also want that. And then no alcohol-based cleaners, additives, no pork or porcine additives, etc. Machine slaughter is typically certified for by the for-profit certifiers, ISWA, ISA, HTO, and a handful of others. Machine slaughter has slightly weaker requirements, so they're not as religiously strict. That does mean that they tend to have a lower price premium. These guys will certify for hand or machine slaughter. Machine slaughter is typically poultry. And especially in the case of poultry, there's electric and or atmospheric stunning that is allowed under these certifications in general. No individual spoken blessing for an individual animal at the time of death is required. You may see, depending on the certifier, that you speak the blessing over the machine, or you speak it once, and that's set for the rest of the animals. That is very dependent on the individuals there. There's not a specific throat cut requirement to my knowledge. No alcohol-based cleaners or additives, again, because alcohol is forbidden. And the slaughter person or the supervisor on the kill floor that would need to be present for these types of certifications to be upheld. They could be Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. Again, this may vary by certifier because there's a lot of heterogeneity, but this is the general requirements here. So if you were to want to get certified, which I would recommend if you want to work in this market, as consumers continually want more labeling and transparency, you should reach out to your preferred certifiers. They all should have a website, phone number, etc. Maybe think about some non-religious certifications that would pair well. That also opens your market to non-Muslim consumers who just really like the quality that you would find with a halal product. So like sustainably raised, hormone-free, organic, etc. would pair well. Be ready when you contact these certifiers to provide all of your establishment's information. So how big of an establishment you have or plan to have, if you're going to have access to a qualified slaughter person, depending on where you are in the US, you may have to bring somebody in or work a little harder to find someone in the area. What species you're trying to get certified for, and any changes you may need to make to the physical part of your establishment so that this processing works for you. Prepare for an on-site inspection. That will definitely happen at least once before you get your certification. And the certifier or certifiers will come out and help you to address any issues to obtaining your certification. So if you're slaughtering larger animals, cattle, sheep, you may need to acquire a kill box. It might be effective to position your equipment differently, especially if you want to reach the 30-ish, 33% of Muslim consumers that want the animal killed facing Mecca. Might be a good idea to plan out that way. And they may help you source appropriate inputs if they have those types of connections in the area. And then once you get certified, you will have scheduled and random check-ins or random check-ins. It will depend on the certifier. Okay, marketing to domestic markets. Which markets that you aim to operate in are going to determine which certifications you should obtain and what type of inspection would be ideal for your business. So I've split the market into two broad categories. We have the direct-to-consumer and non-chain businesses, and then we have the chain restaurants and institutional businesses. So kind of a low volume specialty group is the first one, and the lower, the chain restaurants and the institutional markets are more high volume, a little bit less specialty in the way that they choose their products. So if you're going to market direct to consumers or to non-chain businesses, you're probably going to be operating in a space where you want a ZBIHA high transparency certification. Again, these are typically those nonprofit certifiers. You're going to need those stricter standards. You probably will want high quality animals and raising practices, especially in the case of direct to consumers, because there's a reason they're seeking you out, and that's because they can't get that product in a larger grocery store most of the time. Expect that, especially if you're new to the market, consumers and or religious groups, so an Islamic center and a mosque and imam, will likely ask questions and maybe request to visit your facility, see your certification until they kind of establish that trust level. You're less likely to need an FSIS inspection right away in this type of market. There's a couple asterisks there. That depends on where you are in the US. If you're wanting to sell to non-chain businesses and you live perhaps in the Northeast or near the border of two states, and you may end up selling across state lines, you're going to need that federal level inspection. You will probably experience some sort of seasonality, especially around religious holidays. You're going to have a huge increase in demand, which is good, but then the rest of the year might be a little bit slower. So you may want to plan accordingly on how you're going to adjust your operations there. You will need to make a little bit more of an effort to get your name out there because you will be operating in a very tight and close market. So word of mouth and reputation will be vital. If you start off strong, you're going to be able to stay strong. If you're marketing more or want to market more to institutional markets or those larger chain businesses, you will probably be fine with a machine slaughtered certification. You could also go for ZBIHA, but many of these larger institutional and chain business markets will not want to pay that price premium. So you can get away with, or you should maybe aim for these lower transparency certifications, and you can have some less strict standards. In these markets, lower quality animals are typically more acceptable. That's because the consumer is not going to necessarily know exactly who they should visit to ask questions or to follow up if they want to know specifics when they're in one of buying or eating from one of these places. You'll have more consistent capacity needs. You will almost certainly need FSIS inspection right away because you're going to be selling large quantities and probably across state lines. And you probably won't need to do as much of your own self-promotion. A lot of these folks, when you get certified in this space, their contracts include some distribution and other management potential with their certifier in general. For retail and consumer trends, I've kind of broken it into two major demand segments for consumers. What I like to call the traditional cuts, and then the Americanized or convenience cuts that are starting to become more popular. So traditional, this includes those whole or half animals. Typically, you would see that with religious holiday slaughter, like with Ramadan. It's also mainly lamb and goat, a little bit of beef. And these typically tend to be the folks that are a little bit more recent immigrants, or perhaps hold on to their religious beliefs more strongly. And then we have the convenience and or the Americanized versions of these products. So these are further processed products. So hot dogs, burger patties, deli meat, frozen ready to eat meals, things that when first generation immigrants have children or grandchildren and the kids go to school, they say, I want a hot dog, I want a burger patty, just like my friends. And so the demand for these more Americanized products is somewhat fueled by the younger generations there. So we will also see increased demand for poultry, beef, and then case ready or restaurant specific cuts, not those like whole or half animals. So because consumers are in these main spaces, this is also what retailers are starting to demand. When I interviewed and surveyed retailers for my dissertation project, a good number of them said, we really want to be able to supply deli meat or frozen ready to eat meals. We just don't have access to them at the particular certification level that we're looking for. In this case, it tended to be Zabiha products, those hand slaughtered products. For the Muslim consumer, over the past 10, 15 years or so, there's been a larger push for healthier, environmentally friendly, and ethically oriented meat and poultry products. And when I say ethically oriented, I mean like animal welfare, humanely raised, grass-fed, etc. They really, really are interested in transparency and clear labeling so they can look at the package or look at your website and know exactly what they're getting. As I said, we've seen increasing income patterns, which means there's increased demand for quality proteins. And as the generations get more settled in the US and Americanized culture, they want more of those Americanized or convenience food options. We've seen a large increase in demand in suburban areas. We talked about how many of the more recent immigrants or second or third generation Muslims are typically highly educated, skilled labor. And where do those folks typically live? Suburban and metro areas. There's also strong interest in mail delivery, especially in the case where they don't live in those areas with large Muslim populations nearby. So examples of those companies would be like Boxed Halal, Crescent Food Ships. There's a whole bunch of others as well. For institutional demand, due to a whole bunch of different civil rights cases and things over the past couple decades, there's an increased need for hospitals, schools, and prisons to supply these types of products for the folks who are in those facilities. For instance, the Chicago School District, I think it was about 2 years ago, just made a fairly significant contract to provide halal products for the students in their school cafeterias. For non-Muslim consumers, these are the types of folks that if you're doing direct to consumer marketing may help round out those non-religious holiday spikes in demand. There are actually a significant number of non-Muslim consumers who are interested in halal, again, because of the health, the environment, and ethically oriented aspects. They also care about transparency and labeling. And who are these folks? They're typically younger generations, millennials and Gen Z. Not that you can't see some older folks also interested. They're also typically college educated. Typically females, although keep in mind that women do the majority of grocery shopping in general. So it's not as though you can't find male customers, just typically you see females. And they're going to be shopping at, or you may be able to reach them at, co-ops, farmers markets, or other places of business like that. Pricing, the fun stuff here. So as Dave said previously, there's very, very little information available in the United States about halal meat and poultry pricing. And that's because the market is, one, fairly small, and two, when we collect price information at the USDA, we don't typically disaggregate into such fine detail as to what particular meat and poultry products go into our various market reports. But things to consider: your pricing strategy is going to depend, or should depend, on if you're selling direct to consumer to those low volume non-chain retailers or restaurants, or to those higher volume institutions and chain retailers. You will most likely be able to obtain higher profit margins, return margins, with direct to consumer or direct to those low volume non-chain retailers, about 25% or more. Your lower margins will come most likely with the institutions and the chain retailers. 10 to 15% is about the number I would expect. So you have the trade-off of needing to have higher volume for those institutions and chain retailers, or you can do lower volume and have slightly larger margins if you go more the direct-to-consumer route. You should expect that your pricing and what you're able to charge for your products should be on par with other niche and specialty certified meats in your area. Kosher, organic, grass-fed, humanely raised, you name it, one of those types of specialty certified products. You're also going to be impacted by your local market. Your geographic region in particular is going to be a big one. So the Northeast, the Midwest, parts of California, parts of Denver is actually a really high Muslim population growth point recently. And so you may be able to get more out of that region than you would elsewhere. The consumer population that's nearby, the presence of other retailers and restaurants in the area that you could be selling to, and if there's already a lot of other halal processors or not, and if they're meeting the demand of the consumer base in that space. So if you're going to develop your pricing plan, first you need to establish your base cost of operation. You probably have heard about this from folks before, using something like an enterprise budget. I say that Penn State has some good resources. Other land-grant universities will also, other groups as well. So things to keep in mind are that there's usually seasonality in prices in agricultural markets. When are animals born? When are they ready for slaughter? Is there high demand for things versus low demand? So your pricing will probably need to be flexible and adapt. And after a couple of years in the industry, you will probably be able to kind of predict some of that ebb and flow. You should consider the riskiness of your input supply. So depending on where you're sourcing your animals from, whether you're raising them yourself or you're working with local producers, the cost of animals to slaughter at your facility can change very drastically if there are weather issues, if there are feed shortages, illness, things like that. So you may want to look for a supplier that is very, very well established, has really high quality biocontainment type practices at their operation, etc., if you're able to. And then you're going to need to do some of your own research in your own local market. And when I say local market, I say within about a 10 to 50 mile radius, to ensure that you're on par with your prices and not pricing yourself out of the market, nor leaving money on the table that could further your business growth. And the big point I want to drive home here, you need to keep good record keeping. You need this information for a whole lot of different things. You need to keep clear, accurate, timely, and detailed records of every single cost and revenue that goes into your business. I highly recommend multiple or backed up copies. Use a cloud, use a flash drive, whatever suits you. And these records are going to be very good for you as an individual and as a business to keep track of what's going on. Your taxes, good for grant programs. If the USDA has something else come out that you may want to apply for. Good for your certifications and your government inspections. So some of these certifiers are going to want to know the specifics of where you're getting your animals from and if they are appropriately raised for their certification. So these types of records will be needed. So I'm just going to run through a quick example with a halal certified beef product. Let's assume that the live weight of the animal is about 1,200 pounds. It's also certified grass-fed and humanely raised. I have assigned it this price per head of about $3,000. And we're going to consider our total processing or enterprise costs may include the cost of your labor, loan payments, certification fees, storage. You can read this whole list here. And they may not. There may also be things that I did not list here that are necessary for your particular operation. So with that animal, we know the cost per pound of live weight is going to be about $2.50. Hanging carcass yield is typically about 55 to 60%. So if you want to know your break-even cost for your hanging carcass, we're going to divide that 250 by that 55%, and we're going to end up with about $4.55 per pound that you would need to sell the hanging carcass for to break even for your establishment. Once you start into processing, let's say processing costs per pound are about 65 cents. That's a little higher than some of the numbers I've seen quoted elsewhere, because I'm assuming with halal, you will probably have to pay for that specialized labor, or maybe some specialized cleaning agents that are non-alcohol based, etc. You add that processing cost per pound to the cost of your hanging carcass to get your break-even cost for those two things combined, and that's about $5.20. We know that boneless versus bone-in yields, it's about 55% for boneless for a beef product, about 70% for bone-in. So if you want to find the break-even price per pound on average for those different types of products, we're going to, again, divide by those percentages, 55 or 70, and we end up with $9.45 or $7.43 per pound for that break-even. And then here's the fun part. If you want to make money as a business, you're going to tack on your desired profit margin. So here I've chosen 25%. In this instance, I'd be assuming that you're selling direct to consumer then. So then you can calculate your price per pound on average that you want to get for this beef. And it's going to need to be about $12.60 per pound if you're doing a boneless product, or $9.91 per pound if you're doing a bone-in product. These types of calculations are walked through. Like I said, the Penn State University has got some good examples. There are other land-grant universities that have good kind of like cheat sheets for calculating your expected hanging carcass yield and boneless versus bone-in yield, so that you can then calculate what your price per pound on average needs to be for different types of animals. So, as I said, there's not really a common place to get all of your information for selling these products at any given place in the US. What I have done is I've put together some ranges for, in this case, direct to consumer pricing. So Dave, we will be putting out some information on this after the webinar as well. But for particular cuts of halal certified beef, these are the types of prices I've seen consumers reporting to me in my surveys, and that I saw from retailers and or processors when I was out in the field collecting data. These ranges that you can see on the screen, if you're near the higher end, you most likely had additional quality indicators attached to this product. They were hand slaughtered, they have sustainability labels, they're extra lean, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe they're locally raised and processed. And the lower end of the ranges would not have those in general. So some of these are fairly tight categories, and some of them are wider, which is due to, again, the different quality indicators, but also potentially where you are in the US. Halal certified lamb, here's some additional ranges. Oh, I forgot to say this previously. This is per pound. I know that not all of these products are typically sold on a per pound basis, but this would break down that cost that way for easier comparison to that price per pound that you need to make your profit margins that we calculated previously on another slide. So here's the ones for lamb. Again, higher end of the range is going to be having additional quality indicators. Lower end of the range will probably be lacking those quality indicators. And then we also have examples for halal certified chicken per pound, direct to consumer. Here are some more ranges. The lower end of the range, you may still see Zabiha or free range or all these other labels if you're in particularly the southern part of the United States, because there are so many chicken manufacturing opportunities down there. And if you're in the other parts of the US, you're probably going to be near the higher range, potentially even without these additional quality indicators. Now, if you were to try and sell to a retailer, or a restaurant and not direct to consumer, you want to keep in mind your average retail and or restaurant markup. So the average retail markup in general for meat and poultry products is about 30 to 40%. Again, it may shift a little bit depending on where you are. You will most likely need to check in on retailers' prices in your expected market area if you want to sell to a retailer to determine what your wholesale prices should stick around. So for instance, in Chicago, because I'm near that area, the Chicago metro area includes Chicago, all the suburbs, some of us out further in Illinois, and then also parts of southern Wisconsin. So the price that I've seen in this area for Zabiha Halal lamb chops that are Frenched is about $29 per pound in a butcher case at one of these like ethnic stores. So assuming a 35% markup, your wholesale price as the processor trying to sell your Zabiha Halal lamb chops to the retailer, got the calculations here on the bottom of the screen. Your wholesale price max would be about $21.48 per pound in the current market. If we're selling for restaurants have a much higher markup, roughly 200 to 300%, again, depending on where you are in the US. Again, you're going to need to research restaurants' prices in your expected market area. The Chicago Metro, again, restaurant Zabiha Halal steaks. So this includes like New York strip, ribeye. I kind of grouped all steaks together and kind of averaged there. It's about $78 per pound. So assuming that the restaurant is charging a 250% markup right in the middle of that range I quoted you, your highest wholesale price for the Chicago market would be about $31.20 per pound. And you can do this any cut of meat that you would like and any species, but you'll have to do that market research a little bit on your own in each area. This is the final slide I have before it's time for questions, but the final part of my dissertation research covered a consumer willingness to pay study, where we tried to understand what consumers are willing to pay for different attributes of halal products. Now, these are preliminary study results. These were generated with about 100 responses. I'm up to about 500 or so right now, so these numbers are not exact. I just want to make sure that you're aware of that, but there's some good estimates for understanding how consumers prioritize things. So like I said, I looked at consumers' willingness to pay at the retail level for halal meat and poultry products. When I say retail level, this would include like a grocery store, like an Indo-Pac grocery store, but also perhaps a processor that does direct to consumer processing. Or in my area, again, in Northern Illinois, there's a handful of processors that have opened up a retail side of their business over the past handful of years as they've been able to grow. These willingness to pay numbers are not specific to a species or a particular cut of meat, but like an overall average. So what we found was that for Muslim halal consumers, they were willing to pay an extra roughly $1.18 per pound on average if the processor and or retailer had a halal certification for their overall business. So the store was certified, the establishment was certified, and even better if both the processor and the retailer had those certifications. They were also willing to pay an extra roughly 85 cents per pound on average for a product level certification. So the individually wrapped steak in the meat counter said halal on it, and they could determine which particular type of halal that was, zabiya or machine slaughtered. This is relative to the consumer's current lifestyle. So if they're I'm talking about the next bullet point in particular, if they currently drive 45 minutes to the store or processor to get their products, each additional 15 minutes they had to travel to a new processor retailer would decrease their willingness to pay by about $1.60 per pound on average. Now, some people in this market space, some consumers travel 15 minutes, some travel 6 hours, believe it or not. So this 15-minute estimate is comes from a wide range of folks. And then finally, if they had an established trustworthy relationship, so that word of mouth and reputation, the community that I was talking about much earlier on in the presentation with the processor or the retailer, that's going to increase their willingness to pay for a product by about 61 cents per pound on average. So good things to keep in mind as you're designing what you want your business to potentially look like, where you might be setting up shop, etc. Okay, and that is it for me for my actual presentation. And then I believe we are turning it over to Q&A.
Yeah, good
Well,
job.
Kelsey,
Yeah.
that was fantastic. Kelsey, there's excuse the pun, a lot to digest there with all of this. So yeah, Chris and I are going to come off camera here, and I know I saw in the Q&A, Catherine has a couple of questions.
Sure.
One of them, statistically, which demographic, Muslim versus non-Muslim, own machine slaughtered processing facilities versus hand slaughtered? So any
Sure.
guidance
That's a
on
good
that?
one. That's a good one. In my research, the majority of folks who were doing machine slaughtered were non-Muslim. Especially in the case of the larger facilities. So if you were doing like machine slaughtered poultry and doing, say, 20,000 or something birds a day, those were non-Muslim folks in general. Whereas for the hand slaughter, the zabiha slaughter, the vast majority were Muslim. However, there were a good number, I'd say about a third, 20%, maybe 20% to a third of the folks were non-Muslim, but considered themselves to be fairly religious Christians or Jewish folks that just, when they expressed their motivations in the survey or in interviews to me, they felt it was necessary to provide a religious product, and it did not matter to them if it was their personal religion or someone else's.
All right, and Catherine had the second one here is if the government were to take control of the halal standard, who would be in charge?
That's a great question. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but there's some considerations here. The First Amendment of the United States says that the U.S. government or state governments cannot regulate anything to do with religion. So the most that the government can do is enforce a standard that has already been set. So the standard itself would be set by consumer groups, religious groups, processing organizations, etc. And then enforcement could come down through consumer right to know or consumer labeling laws from, say, the USDA, the FTC, other folks like that. So the government would not be setting the standard because that is illegal, and they cannot say what is halal or not halal, but they would be in charge of any fraud or prosecution type arrangements there in the case that a label was incorrectly used and a consumer group or someone else raised that to their attention, or they found it through an audit type program.
Let's go ahead. You take over, and yeah, you throw her the next few questions.
Get set up here. Okay, we are a USDA FSIS federally inspected thermal processor located in Detroit metro area. We pack canned chili underneath our brand, but given Metro Detroit high Muslim population, we have a local non-chain grocery looking for halal chili for their Americanized halal canned chili. We are not a slaughter facility, but would be interested in connecting with halal slaughters. And I think probably the best way, if you can put your email possibly in the chat mailbox, and then if there's anyone else on the call that would be interested in connecting with you, then they can grab your email out of the chat versus the Q&A, and then we'll make sure, and then send that to Dave and I as well, and we will try to make sure that we connect you with anyone that we run across here in the coming weeks. And Kelsey, did you have anything on that? Maybe I know they're looking for a halal processor. Do you know anyone in the Detroit?
There are a good number in that area. I'm sure you've heard of Wolverine, because they're one of the largest. And I know there's a handful that are right over the state line with Indiana and or Ohio that you could potentially reach out with. Most of the ones that I know of in the area are certified by one of those, like I said, those nonprofit or Zabiha certifiers. And if you wanted to get into that space, in order to be able to sell those products as certified to your retail counterpart, you would probably also need to get the certification for that product. I will just say that. as to who in particular you should reach out to. Like I said, Wolverine's a good start, but there's also a lot of smaller facilities just throughout the area that don't quite have that name recognition. And they may be able to assist you, and or reaching out to Michigan State's extension folks or their meat science, animal science folks. They will be aware of a good list of processors or slaughterhouses in the area that would do halal, that might be looking for someone to partner with for those types of products.
All right, next question we have for you, Kelsey, is have you done any research on carcass size of, for example, lamb, goat, and poultry?
I have not. I'm assuming you're talking about perhaps different percentage yields for carcasses, or maybe like fat content. That is no. I looked more at the consumer demand and supply chain process. I would suspect that that type of research would be more from an animal scientist, again, potentially Michigan State or other land-grant universities near you.
This could also be average sizes for slaughter as well.
Good. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Average sizes for slaughter for sheep and goat, I know will be more on the smaller side, around like 55 to 60 pounds is what I've seen quoted before. I'm not as certain about cattle, and I'm not as certain about poultry, though I suspect, since most of the poultry that I have seen certified as halal, for example, like if you were to do Crescent Foods or a smaller retailer like in my area, since they also do like grass-fed or free range for most of their animals, free range for chickens, they will be a little bit more on the smaller side because they're not being fed the grain-based diet.
All right, thank you very much. Next question is, are there any financial assistance programs that pay for halal processing fees for nonprofit farms growing for the emergency food systems, such as food pantries and soup kitchens?
That is a great question. I am unaware of any that specifically do that. I will say that the certifiers that do nonprofit certification do not charge a fee at all, which would help for you to obtain your certification. The fee that is charged by the for-profit certifiers, I was quoted anywhere between like a handful of cents per pound to a handful of cents plus some set fee for the overall facility. Whereas the nonprofit certifiers will not charge that fee, which may help in setting up that program. The other thing you can do, depending on where you are in the United States, I know that there are, thinking of again in the Chicago area because that's what I'm most familiar with, some of the charitable organizations in the area that are run by Muslim groups, consumer groups, or community centers will involve themselves in that type of business space so that they can provide a product for their families, as well as assist in the development of the supply chain in their area. So that's something you could look into potentially.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. We have a couple, and Sean Dean, there's a note that our chat is disabled. I'm not sure if you can switch that around or not, but.
Well, yeah, and I think the gentleman that you encouraged them to put their email in the chat, put it in the Q&A here. So yeah.
Yeah, we got it. The next note is that our chat is disabled. So if we can look at that, but we'll save this email and try to share it with our contacts as well. The next question we have, Kelsey, is as a Muslim halal slaughter and processor, how do we ensure that halal standards remain high so that if enforced by USDA, non-Muslim large facility processors don't have greater influence than the Muslim community on set standards?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that question. My best recommendation there is to be as active as you can be in the community organizations or processing organizations or religious groups who are working in that space already, pushing for some sort of certification to appear at the US national level. So there's the I think it's the National Halal Council is based in Florida. I may be misrecalling exactly what that what their acronym stands for. They do a lot of advocacy, so getting involved with them. Also, some of these nonprofit certifiers have like branches of their organizations that do a little bit more of that political type involvement with trying to get these standards and the process for regulation set up. But outside of that, the biggest thing I can think of is a lot of education for your fellow Muslim consumers and processors and retailers, and the US public in general. Over the past 10 or 15 years, you've seen the biggest spike in the interest of the transparency and the labeling, and knowing where your food comes from and what is involved in its processing. And you can continue probably to capitalize on that and just do what you can to spread your own awareness of what halal should be and how it should be done, in your viewpoint.
Yeah,
Let
pay
me add
attention
on to
to
that, Kelsey. I just, yeah, I think that, when your research shows the interest in transparency, that is a real opportunity for the folks that are, adhering to the highest standard to get that message out there,
Yeah.
to those consumers. So I think, yeah, anytime you have, the USDA or FTC or whatever enforcing something, they're enforcing the baseline standard.
Correct.
But it's then an opportunity for those that are going above and beyond to be able to communicate that message and the
Correct.
reason that they are charging a premium for that product. So,
Yep. Yep.
and
And
Chris,
you
just
can
yep, go ahead.
say, and you can pair up with, so these nonprofit certifiers, when they list very explicitly on their website, or their fact sheets or what have you, what they certify for and what they don't certify for, they will also attach your name as a business and or as an individual person, depending on the certifier, to lists that consumers can search for on their site for authentic products, which may, again, help you come into contact with more folks, spread more awareness, etc.
I would also
Right.
encourage you to pay attention to the comment periods. When USDA opens comment periods for any rulemaking, they have a comment period every time. So don't be afraid to provide your comments. Write a letter. Keep it civil, keep it polite, but provide your comments and your opinions on the subjects. USDA does take those seriously, and they do receive those comments and read all of them. So make sure and provide your comments when those opportunities arise.
A
Go
follow-up
ahead.
on that, I work on rulemaking as part of my job at the USDA with the Packers and Stockyards Division. I can guarantee you, we see your comments, we discuss them potentially for hours on end, how to address them, how to best make sure that the rules do as they're intended. And so if you really want to see something like strict certification and standards and enforcement and regulation for halal, write to us, tell us that. I am the person with the Packers and Stockyards Division that when we have questions come up about religious slaughter, the emails go to my inbox. And so when we're crafting rules and responses to comments, I'm going to be one of the people reading them and telling folks what we should or should not potentially be including in these rules. So the best way you can advocate for yourself is to put yourself out there. Yeah,
absolutely. And I want to make sure everyone knows the chat box is open. Shondine got that open for us. And if there are things you want to share or email information you want to share, please go ahead and put that in there. And then I think we captured the questions, but one comment I had from your slide, from one of your slides, Kelsey, it's all great information. You provided so much information over the last hour. I would watch in the charts for our customers that might be located in our technical assistance applicants that we have. Processing fees vary all over the United States. And when you're calculating those prices and those costs, the Penn State chart listed a processing fee of 65 cents a pound. That was probably pre-COVID. Nowadays we're seeing everything, even from $1 a pound up, plus a kill fee. We see kill fee, off-all is getting more expensive to haul off. So there's now off-all removal fees that we see. So processing costs continue to go up as more regulations, more stringent issues on rendering, off-all removal, hides. We can't get rid of hides sometimes. So lots of factors depending on where our processors are located at. So as you see some of the general information that Kelsey put out, we always have to take into account that we need to look at where your region is at, you know, fill in the blanks with what's relative to where you are at, and make those cost adjustments based on your region and your area. So we're here to help you with that. Dave, Kelsey, and myself, we're available. You're welcome to email us anytime, reach out through our technical assistance network. Our flowerhill.institute website is available. Our technical assistance forms are available there. So I know we were going just a little bit over on time, but we're covering so much important information, and we're so appreciative to Kelsey for her time today. So thank you so much. And Dave, with that, I'll leave it to you, or Kelsey, with
Okay.
some closing
Yeah,
words.
no, and I just want to echo that, Chris. Kelsey, this has been fantastic. And for those that are on the webinar, you know, this is not a one and done. This is really important information, and we really appreciate the number of folks that registered and participated today. We want to facilitate communication among those of you that are involved in halal processing and marketing so that we can learn from each other. And that's part of our role. I also want to acknowledge, I forgot to introduce him at the beginning, but the wizard behind the curtain that keeps this rolling, Shandine Jones, who's our communications director. He made sure that all of the screens worked and everything. So thank you, Shandine, for helping us today. And Kelsey, anything you want to add before we hop off?
No, just happy to have been invited, happy to share information, and I'll continue working with Flower Hill and other folks in this area as much as I can. And again, you have someone at the USDA who works in this space that if you really want to see things and you really want to make sure that the government and enforcement regulation is conscious of this particular market, I will be available to help you do that as much as I can in my capacity as a federal employee. So,
although she will be taking a little break here in a while because
yes,
she's got twins on the way. So yeah, we'll give you a
yeah,
little break during that period, Kelsey.
that would be good. I will need some sleep,
Okay.
hopefully.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and thank everybody for attending. Feel free to email us. Let's keep this conversation going. So have a great day.
Thank you all.
Yes,
Happy
thank
holidays.
you all.